Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to present this research among such an impressive group of colleagues. And before I begin, I'd just like to thank Grant Gutermos, who's the Curator and Director of Collections at Glasgow American Homes Preservation Trust. As you heard, I had the privilege of being a Collections Fellow along with 3 other of my colleagues who are here today. And under Grant's direction and upon his recommendation, I'm giving this talk today. I'd also like to thank Matt Thurlow and the rest of the staff at Decorative Arts Trust for organizing this important event in support of emerging scholars. At the beginning of this project, I was charged with developing, I should start my presentation. At the beginning of this project, I was charged with developing an object history for this decorative mantelpiece currently installed in the dining room at one of the Trust's properties called Edgewater in Barrytown, New York. There's been a limited amount of information known about this piece, other than it had been purchased by the Trust's founder, Dick Jenrette, and installed in 2002, and that it had previously been owned by Jenrette's Wall Street investment firm, DLJ, and installed in his private office at the company's headquarters. While this presentation is largely a provenance history, it also explores the relationship between architectural fragments and the markets through which they were collected and sold throughout the 20th century. Edgewater is located along the Hudson River in Barrytown, New York, and is currently owned and managed by Classical American Homes Preservation Trust, which was established by Dick Jenrette as a nonprofit in 1993. The property has had at least 6 owners since the house was constructed in 1824. The mantelpiece, however, has its own historic timeline of events, which extends far beyond its arrival at Edgewater in 2002. You'll find key dates associated with the mantelpiece highlighted in teal, while I've retained important dates related to Edgewater's building chronology in gray. Thanks to the expert record-keeping and generosity of Frank Levy of Bernard and S. Dean Levy, I was able to begin tracing a chronological history of the mantelpiece. Working backwards, the piece was purchased in 1985 from Bernard and Dean for $6,500 by Jenrette's investing firm, Donaldson, Lufkin, Jenrette, for their corporate collection. Jenrette had installed the mantelpiece in his private office at DLJ, which I've highlighted in the image on the lower right. You'll see the teal arrow pointing to the mantelpiece. DLJ was acquired by Credit Suisse, and it's from this corporation that Jenrette purchased the mantelpiece for Edgewater. The DLJ corporate collection was housed in their New York-based investment banking firm's offices and included over 3,500 objects, including 75 oil paintings, 1,200 prints, 200 decorative art objects, and 2,000 pieces of printed material from or about the city of New York. The oil paintings included John Trumbull's portrait of Alexander Hamilton, a Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington, and Rembrandt Peale's portrait of New York businessman Robert Ainsley. Many of the furniture pieces were designed and made by craftsmen of New York in the Federal and Empire styles of the late 18th and early 19th century and were used actively as part of the offices. The corporate collection had begun with Jenrette's business partner Dan Lufkin in 1969 and was later large enough to require a full-time curator, Margise Howell, to manage. The firm's collection expanded rapidly in the build-up to the nation's bicentennial in 1976, particularly the holding of memorabilia related to the financing of the American Revolution. The partners intended to sell the pieces when they reached their peak value, but as the collection's curator shared in a 1992 interview with Financial Executive magazine, the company executives were, quote, so emotionally attached, end quote, to the collection that they decided to keep it. As the firm grew, it acquired other Wall Street businesses and their own collections of 19th century American art. In addition, DLJ also acquired the New York City Chamber of Commerce collection of 50 portraits of prominent people in New York and American financial history in 1983. The company was exceptionally proud of this collection, often using artwork from their holdings to decorate corporate literature, such as 2 annual reports. This slide includes just a little snippet from the company's self-published 1989 brochure entitled Americana Collection to provide some further context on the company's decorative art holdings. Now, this is a really fascinating area of research that has sparked a lot of future interest for me. I think that this history of corporate collecting, and particularly decorative art within corporate collections, is very understudied and has a lot of future promise. So prior to DLJ's ownership, Bernard and Dean's predecessor company, Ginsberg and Levy, had purchased the Mantelpiece from Park Burnett Galleries in 1942 at the sale of the Rosenbach Company collection. The Rosenbach Company was founded by Abraham Rosenbach, who began collecting while as a student at University of Pennsylvania. The company is largely known for its collections of rare manuscripts and books, and helped assemble collections in the Huntington Library in California and the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. The company provided private services to J.P. Morgan, Lessing Rosenbach, and Harry Elkins Widener. And with its founder dying in 1952, the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia opened as a public institution to share the Rosenbach's personal collection with the public. Now, while the Rosenbach's role in dealing major literary volumes is well known and has been published about, their impressive holdings in fine and decorative art have been largely understudied and are less understood. The 1942 auction catalog lists this mantle that's currently installed in Edgewater's dining room, describing it as having previously belonged to the collection of J. Paxton Temple in Tangway, Pennsylvania. It makes mention that it had previously belonged to a house in Maryland circa 1780. The auction catalog does not include a photograph of the mantle, but thanks to the generous research support provided by Assistant Librarian Nancy Lowe at the Rosenbach Museum and Library, I was able to locate a photograph of the mantelpiece in a brochure announcing the Rosenbach Company's exhibition and acquisition of the Temple collection. You'll see that in the middle here. The Temple collection was exhibited by the Rosenbach Company in their New York galleries at 173rd Madison Avenue in 1923, and described the collection in the brochure as, quote, one of the finest collections of genuine antique furniture that has ever been offered to the American public. In the archival records at the Rosenbach Museum and Library, there is an agreement dated February 14th, 1920, between Temple and the Rosenbach Company that lists a Georgian mantle with Wedgwood decorations dated 1780 and priced at $255. The Rosenbach Company agreed to buy items in Temple's home in Cheney, Pennsylvania for a total of $10,000 at the signing of this agreement. The 1921 brochure describes a showroom in which this mantelpiece was displayed within the context of a number of period rooms that the company had curated as part of the exhibition. And these include the Colonial Room, the Adam Room, the Medici Room, the Louis XVI Room, and the Department of Interior Decoration, among many others. This has also piqued a lot of my curiosity about what the Rosenbachs were doing in the 1920s with this material. It's unclear what room the mantelpiece was installed within, but by 1928, the showroom had closed. What I could find about the Jacob Paxton Temple collection is largely related to a very large sale of this work by Anderson Galleries in the following year, in 1922. This was done in collaboration with the Rosenbach Company, and in January 1922, there was an extensive illustrated catalog that accompanied the sale. Many of the items sold at this sale served as parts of the founding collections of many decorative art galleries in museums throughout the country. And again, very little is actually published on who Temple was and where this material went. Unfortunately, the Edgewater mantelpiece was not included as part of this auction, and this is likely because it was installed in the Rosenbach's New York showroom. But there are two mantelpieces photographed and listed as part of the sale with Anderson Galleries. These examples provide some additional context for Temple's acquisition of the mantelpiece that's currently installed at Edgewater and document a longstanding interest in late 18th century architectural woodwork in his own collecting. Jacob Paxton Temple was recognized as an authority on antiques collecting in the early 20th century. He had worked as a civil engineer for the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, and he had been connected with extensive operations of the corporation and supervised the construction of $1 million depot in Trenton, New Jersey. He shared his home with his wife, Ada Underhill of Long Island, along with two surviving children at the time of his death, Richard Underhill and Anne Underhill Temple. Listed in the 1912 Pennsylvania Railroad Atlas of the Main Line, Temple's property was called Primrose Dairy Farm, and I've highlighted it here. It encompassed 220 acres. The house on the property was first built in 1855 and survives today as the Bailey Gauch House in the town of Tangway in Chester County, Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, I couldn't find any photographs related to his installation of the collection in the house during his lifetime. Now, returning to our mantelpiece, we can confirm that the piece is comprised of both carved wood and modeled composition. The style and material choice are typically associated with interiors designed by British architect Robert Adam, which was popularized throughout English and American homes for the wealthy through the publication of architectural pattern books. Adam had a definite self-interest in marketing the use of composition materials in the late 18th century in England, as he had purchased patent rights and lobbied for the Act of Parliament in 1776 that gave him exclusive rights to sell composition. On the Edgewater mantelpiece, there's a central frieze tablet that displays a vaguely Greek mythological scene of male figures approaching an altar with gifts while a small male child fuels the fire. The trusses on either side flanking the central frieze depict a dancing bare-breasted female figure with a new child at her feet on the left side and a bare-breasted female figure playing harp on the right. The sides are roughly symmetrical and display a central oval medallion. The side friezes are roughly symmetrical and display a central oval medallion with white relief built up over a dark blue background meant to resemble Wedgwood ceramics, surrounded by spiral vines that terminate into flanking cantharos. On the left side, the oval medallion depicts 3 children sitting next to a small tree, and on the right, 3 children that appear to be wrestling over an object. The Edgewater mantelpiece follows the design conventions of a much earlier Robert Adam mantelpiece composed of marble, plaster, and wood for Kettleston Hall, built 1757-1759. Some of these shared elements include a themed crown molding supporting trim molding below. At Edgewater, these elements are palmetto and acanthus, respectively. Below the crown molding is a frieze molding, side friezes of raised composition ornament, flanking a central frieze tablet. The sides of the mantelpiece are supported by flanking fluted columns with composition capitals. Many of Adam's designs were remade and reconfigured following the publication of The Works of Robert and James Adam in 1778. An example from this book is shown on the left, with a fireplace illustration closely related to the overall composition of the Edgewater mantelpiece. In looking for similar compositions and museum collections, a close parallel to the Edgewater example attributed to Robert Welford is currently in the collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Welford built his business in Philadelphia through the creation of ornamented mantels consisting of carved motifs and applied composition to convey fine, delicate lines of neoclassical style popularized by Robert Adam. The popularity of neoclassical ornaments and furnishings was inspired by the art of ancient Greece and Rome, recently rediscovered in the 1760s excavations at Pompeii and Herculaneum. Robert Welford was born south of London and apprenticed with composition making with John Jacques, the famous Paris-trained composition maker who brought the craft to London in the mid-18th century. In 1796, Welford emigrated to Philadelphia, where he established the finest and most prominent ornamental composition manufactory in the U.S. at that time. The crisply defined details characteristic of Welford's work were achieved through the use of brass molds rather than wooden molds. Welford supplied carpenters and house builders in Philadelphia and as far away as Charleston, South Carolina, with a wide range of composition ornaments and instructions for properly tempering and fixing them to interior work. The PMA example is one of 13 in the museum's extensive collection of architectural woodwork and is signed by Welford on the central sarcophagus. While Welford's signature has not been identified on the Edgewater mantelpiece, the repetition of the truss decorations on other known Welford mantelpieces might indicate the carver's attribution, either for a portion or the entirety of the mantelpiece. Scholar Mark Reinberger, in his impressive monograph on Welford, has identified the truss figures as Erato and Melpomene based on their similarities to George Richardson's 1779 publication, Iconology, or a collection of emblematic figures. The figure playing a lyre is believed to be Erato, the muse of love poetry, and is often paired with a woman holding a mask who flings her arm back dramatically while running with a Cupid or Putti, likely Melpomene, the muse of tragic drama. Reinberger has identified this pair of trusses on mantles for a house in Charleston, South Carolina, and to a mantle that currently belongs to the Bayou Bend Museum in Houston, Texas. The truss details on the mantle in the dining room at Edgewater are exact replicas of these known Welford designs. It's believed that the mantelpiece is either one of Welford's design or at the very least includes Welford components that were used and integrated into this mantelpiece. Interestingly enough, when Jennett's firm first purchased the mantelpiece that was installed at Edgewater, it was bought alongside an attributed Robert Welford mantelpiece that was later installed in Jennett's home at Baker House in Manhattan, where this symposium used to be held. For now, the provenance trail ends with Jacob Temple Paxton and the Rosenbach auction provenance dating to a 1780 construction date and a mysterious house at Maryland. Based on other examples of this truss design and Welford's own biographical details, the date of creation is likely closer to 1800 or 1815. Unfortunately, I was unable to locate any further reference to the Maryland house in the Rosenbach archival records. While this presentation follows the story of an Adamesque composition fireplace, it is my hope that it sparks further inquiry into the discovery, valuation, and exchange of architectural components throughout the 20th century. I'm fascinated by this mantelpiece's installation within multiple corporate brokerage offices for DLJ, and believe that there is much more to be probed about the unique role that architectural salvage and fragmentation has played in American decorative arts as a backdrop, as a valued asset, and as a connective link to extensive spatial past. Thank you for your thoughtful attention, and I look forward to discussing this further with you after.